In 1969, as part of Project Magnet, the U.S. government's Central Intelligence Agency mapped magnetic and gravitational anomalies in the north of the African continent. But the main task of the mission was to conduct aerial reconnaissance of a suspicious geological formation in the Sahara, the Richat structure. Geologists are still debating what could have created such a perfect pattern on Earth's surface. The CIA claims that no anomaly was found on the ground, and such relief was apparently created by nature accidentally. At the same time, the intelligence services are still hiding the results of the structure's survey from the public. So why did the CIA classify what was found under the Sahara Desert? If people wandered in the desert near the small desert town of Wadan in Mauritania, they didn't see anything remarkable there, only sand and stones. The main mystery of this area was accidentally discovered only in 1965. Back then, NASA was carrying out the Gemini 4 space mission. An American astronaut had to go into outer space for the first time in history. But an equally exciting event happened before the ship even reached its destination. Looking at our planet from the portholes, the ship's crew noticed strange circular patterns in the African desert. That's how the first pictures of the Richat structure were taken. After this discovery, many researchers went to study this geological curiosity. The diameter of the Richat is a mind-boggling 50 kilometers. Its shape somewhat resembles Jupiter's Great Red Spot, but unlike Jupiter, the structure is divided into clearly defined concentric rings. These are almost perfect circles of rocks and sandstone. Geological studies have shown that more ancient rocks are concentrated in the center of this anomaly, while sedimentary and younger rocks are located in the outer rings and ridges. The oldest ring is about 600 million years old. Locals consider this mark on the ground a divine manifestation, the Eye of God, so they call the structure the Eye of the Sahara. At the same time, scientists and geologists are trying to understand how this miracle of nature was formed from a scientific point of view. And so far, there are 3 research camps with different hypotheses. Representatives of the first camp believe that the ring structure is an impact crater created by a meteorite that may have hit Earth many years ago. But this hypothesis has a drawback. The formation is almost completely flat, which is uncharacteristic of an impact crater. Adherents of the second version claim that the Eye of the Sahara is the remains of an ancient volcano. 100 million years ago, there was the separation of Pangaea, a supercontinent that had previously united almost the entire land of Earth. In the process of tectonic shifts on the newly formed African continent, molten rock rose and formed a dome. Over the next millions of years, land surfaces were exposed to erosion, and as the dome subsided, circular ridges were left behind because different rock types inside it weathered at different speeds. But this assumption can also be refuted. After all, no volcanic rocks were found there. Moreover, both versions didn't even consider the interesting fact that 5,000 years ago, the Sahara Desert was underwater. Looking at its current arid environment, it's even hard to believe. Perhaps the representatives of the third camp took this into account, huh? Nope. Their version is the most fantastic because it was offered by ufologists. They believe that the Sahara used to be an alien-built airfield for their spacecraft. Sure thing, this theory seems insane, but not as insane as the CIA's strange actions regarding the research of the Richat structure. Just half a century later, some previously classified CIA files on Project Magnet somehow became available to the public. But at the same time, the report on the anomalies of the Eye of the Sahara consists of only 1 page, and some lines are just hidden. Along with the report, the CIA classified the book The Adam and Eve Story, written by their former employee Chan Thomas. However, some people preserved its electronic copies. This made it possible to learn that the book considers various exotic views on Earth's history, including the description of global floods. One of them allegedly destroyed an entire city in the Sahara, which was surrounded by water at the time. That city was built in the form of rings extending outward. The book states that the settlement was created by strong, warlike, and intelligent people, and that city was called Atlantis. Atlantis is depicted in various fantasy movies, cartoons, and games as a mythical underwater fairy tale city with magical inhabitants. In fact, there's plenty of evidence that the city actually existed. But we might have never known about it because the first information about Atlantis appeared 2,300 years ago, at a time when the transmission and preservation of information was not such an easy thing as it is now. One Egyptian priest shared his knowledge about Atlantis with the Athenian poet Solon, who in turn told about the city to the ancient Greek philosopher Critias. Unfortunately, his grandson recorded all the details in writing, and this grandson was one of the most important and influential people in the history of humankind, a key figure in ancient Greek and Western philosophy, Plato. He collected all the preserved facts about Atlantis in his treatise Timaeus, written in 360 BC. It's too bad Plato was told the history of only the last years of the existence of Atlantis, and he knew nothing about how it was formed. This information is preserved only in myths and legends. They say that Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea, once came across Atlantis. He walked through the world to find the biggest island. Not only did Atlantis become exactly what he needed, but here he found something else, his true love, a girl named Cleito. She was so beautiful that Poseidon was worried that someone else would fall in love and steal her. So the god built a palace and enclosed it with 3 circular moats of increasing width. Then Poseidon and Cleito had 10 children, and one of them was named Atlas. He became king of Atlantis, and the Atlantic Ocean was named after him. All the inhabitants of Atlantis were demigods, and there were no equals to them in the world. Although we know that myths are mostly fiction, some of the nuances of this story coincide with reality. According to Plato, the island on which Atlantis was located was really immense, the size of today's Iceland. And the buildings in the city were also arranged in concentric rings. In the center was a holy temple dedicated to Cleito and Poseidon, surrounded by a wall of gold. According to Plato, the ingenuity of the Atlanteans helped them create a complex defense system protecting the settlement. They dug a great canal to the sea and built bridges that led to different parts of the island. And alongside the bridges, they carved tunnels into the rings of rock. Every passage to the city was guarded by gates and towers, and a wall surrounded each of the city's rings. The walls were constructed of red, white, and black rock quarried from the moats and were covered with brass, tin, and a precious metal or a calcum. This virtually excluded any possibility for conquerors to attack the city, which was quite rich. Plato indicated that in Atlantis, people grew their own food, as the land was quite fertile. It was home to various domesticated animals: sheep, goats, horses, bulls, and even elephants. Atlantis didn't even need to establish trade relations with other powers, as it was completely self-sufficient. Democracy ruled within the city walls. It looks pretty much like Cameron's utopia about peace-loving Pandora, even though the inhabitants of this utopian settlement had all the necessary benefits. At some point, this was no longer enough for them. Thus, the Atlanteans conquered parts of Libya within the Pillars of Hercules as far as Egypt, and the European continent as far as Tyrrhenia, the territory of modern Italy. Then the Athenians began to retake the lands and liberate the people who had been subjected to slavery by the Atlanteans. Those were difficult battles, as the Atlanteans possessed great physical strength and extensive knowledge of science, which helped them develop cunning strategies and unique weapons. In the end, the Athenians managed to win, but that's not why Atlantis disappeared. Myths say that these battles were closely watched by the gods. Zeus didn't like that the Atlanteans became greedy, so he decided to punish them in his own way by flooding the city along with its residents. Of course, there's a real natural disaster behind this legend. In Chan Thomas's Adam and Eve story, there are lines regarding what the Egyptian priests told Solon about the cataclysm that buried Atlantis. The text says that back then, winds and oceans swept over the surface, flooding everything around. And about 11,500 years ago, entire continents were covered with a water column of several kilometers. Indeed, statistics show that in ancient times, tsunamis were much higher and more powerful than modern-day killer waves. So it's entirely possible that 11,000 years ago, there could have been a tsunami that washed away Atlantis in an instant. If it indeed existed, the traces of the city were lost forever. But could the Eye of the Sahara be some kind of lead? The whole difficulty of finding Atlantis lies in the fact that Plato's treatise is built on scraps of data. The philosopher gives us only one clue. The city was situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules. It was the phrase applied in antiquity to the Strait of Gibraltar, namely the rocks of Gibraltar and Ceuta. But the fact is that beyond the strait lies the whole world, and Atlantis could be anywhere. After many years of searching, due to the development of science and technology, researchers could narrow down the list of candidates for the role of the former lands of the island state. They include Antarctica, the Azores, and marshlands of the Dona Ana Park in southern Spain. But only the Rishat structure has the most real evidence that there used to be a city surrounded by water. The first thing that catches your eye is, of course, Rishat's patterns. It's divided into the same number of rings as Atlantis. In addition, remnants of salt were found near the Rishat structure. This indicates that sometime in the last 12,000 years, there had been ocean water there. Moreover, remains of ancient whales, fish, turtles, crocodiles, and manatees have been found in this desert. But skeptics don't take this obvious evidence seriously. They are baffled by the fact that the rings of the Rishat structure are broken, so it's unclear how many of them were filled with water if there was any. Besides, there's no evidence of a canal passing through the rings mentioned by Plato. But in terms of size, it all fits as well. Atlantis supposedly stretched for 24 kilometers, which coincides with the part of Rishat. But naysayers also tried to refute this fact, claiming that the calculation should cover the entire territory of the Eye of the Sahara. And the structure, together with the outer rings, reaches 40 kilometers in diameter. Also, it's important to note that Atlas, allegedly the son of Poseidon, was considered the king of Atlantis. And if we drop the assumption about the divine origin, it completely matches the name of the first king of Mauritania, which sounded the same. In addition, the Rishat structure overlooks the Atlantic Ocean and the Atlas Mountains to the north. Of course, skeptics found something to complain about. They refer to Plato's texts, where this utopian state is described as an island, and the Eye of the Sahara is just a small area on the immense continent. But as it turned out, the Eye of the Sahara might have been an island too. About 7,000 years ago, all of northwest Africa was separated from the mainland by the ancient Taman Rasset River, which flowed from the Atlas Mountains through the present-day Sahara Desert to the sea in Mauritania. Another essential clue proved to be the elephant skeletons found in Mauritania. You see, these animals were widespread in Atlantis. Today, the population of these animals in North Africa is 0. They're entirely extinct there. But the last African bush elephants lived right in Mauritania until the 6th century. Another strong argument could be the white, black, and red stones found in Wadan, near which the Rishat structure is located. After all, according to Plato's treatise, Atlantis boasted houses made of the same stones. Furthermore, the philosopher claimed that Atlantis was rich in iron, copper, and gold. Today, Mauritania exports exactly the same minerals. Scientists suggest that many years ago, Africa really experienced a giant flood. Satellite images of the Richat structure show the places where the floodwaters were rushing across the Sahara towards the sea, which means that the city could have been destroyed by a giant wave. But one of the major arguments in favor of the fact that Atlantis is located in the Sahara was the map of the ancient Greek philosopher Herodotus, compiled in 430 BC. Just look at how the area where the Richat structure now lies is signed on the map. This is the only precisely documented information about the location of Atlantis. But here comes failure again. Later, scientists discovered that Herodotus never actually created any maps. At the same time, this map cannot be called a complete hoax. Even though the map proved to be made thousands of years after Herodotus' death, the unknown author still relied on the historian's work. But after studying the works of Herodotus in more detail, the researchers concluded that he referred to the inhabitants of the Atlas Mountains as the Atlanteans, but the philosopher didn't mention Atlantis at all. And here we would have given up if another map with Atlantis hadn't been found. It was created by the Roman geographer Pomponius Mela, who lived 2,000 years ago. A closer look at it reveals that on the western part of the Sahara, Pomponius wrote Atlante, and it's really a city, not mountains, because in that case, the inscription would be above the mountains, but it's right next to them and written in large letters like all the other cities. Everything around screams that the patterns in the Sahara Desert didn't appear accidentally. Those are the traces of our ancestors, all that's left of the people who perished in just one day. But can you believe that not a single Atlantean managed to survive the disaster? The fact that there really was a major settlement in the Richat structure is also proved by thousands of artifacts found. Those were arrowheads, spears, oars, ship hulls, and even something resembling a surfboard. All these artifacts could be useful to the people of Atlantis, surrounded by water. However, many of these antiquities have been found in the outermost depressions of that structure and are absent in the innermost ones. But this once again proves the veracity of the works of Plato, who described that outside the city walls, there were barracks with spearmen aimed to defend the settlement's security. The clues in the search for the Atlanteans themselves appeared towards the end of the 20th century, when Morocco seriously engaged in the excavation of the prehistoric site of Tafarelt, also known as Grotte de Pigeon. Scientists have analyzed the DNA of over 30 skeletons found in the cemetery cave. The DNA of the ancient humans was only slightly similar to that of the modern-day hunter-gatherers from the Hadza tribe in East Africa, but the DNA of the remains from Tafarelt is not 100% identical to any of the existing human populations. This means that the remains could belong to the people who used to live on the mainland, but then disappeared. For example, the Atlanteans. Their traces are found in different parts of Africa. There's even an assumption that the Egyptian pyramids are also related to them. Legends say that the alchemists and mathematicians of Atlantis developed a formula to store cosmic energy in a crystal, but for that, it had to be placed at the top of a pyramid. The Atlanteans allegedly believed that with the help of this energy, it was possible to cure all kinds of diseases and to live up to 800 years. Some researchers believe that the Atlanteans were those who could help the Egyptians build the pyramids, and ancient Egypt could be one of the colonies of Atlantis. Egyptian myths say that the Egyptians are descended from the 12 great gods. Atlantis had just as many gods: Poseidon, Cleito, and their 10 sons. Now, look at the hieroglyphs discovered in the ancient Egyptian city of Abydos. Many researchers see them as images of something like a modern helicopter, submarine, and airship. And it's assumed that the super advanced civilization of the Atlanteans could have possessed such innovative technologies. Moreover, if we believe the legends, this civilization could have been not entirely human. Legends say that the Atlanteans could grow up to 6 meters, and they had 6 fingers on each of their hands. Presumably, the facial features of the Atlanteans also differed from other nations. They had wide lips, a slightly flattened nose, and huge expressive eyes. Does that ring any bells? It isn't by chance that I mentioned Pandora from James Cameron's Avatar. The director is searching for Atlantis as hard as any scientist or geologist, and Cameron populated Pandora with the ideal invincible and highly spiritual race who closely resemble the Atlanteans. So who knows, perhaps he managed to find out what the CIA withheld in the edited version of the Project Magnet documents. As long as the data remains classified to the general public, we can't be 100% sure that the Rishat structure is the ruins of Atlantis. But it's still one of the most mysterious anomalies on the planet, which has attracted considerable attention of researchers for many years. And some of them will undoubtedly get to the truth pretty soon. What else do you think the Rishat structure could be, if not Atlantis? Write in the comments.